Human Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Heyman.
Hello and welcome to Human Nature. With me, as always, is the spiky one. How you doing, Tyrone?
What's up, Adam? How you doing, man? I'm feeling
Things
pretty
are-
spiky today.
You are so spiky. I was about to say. I thought today we'd talk about another article I'd have written called "White Hats and Black Hats."
Okay.
This is a concept just fascinates me to no end. There's something about the way humans think, and I think it's endemic. I don't think there's any way around it. But we think in a narrative structure, and we always have. It's always subject, verb, direct object, and we throw these things into stories, and that's just how we view the world. I'll prove that at a later date, but trust me, folks, that is how we think. We can't get around it. We've known it all the way back into the ancient times. That's what myths are. That's what religion is, really. And we keep telling ourselves stories over and over and over. And one of the classic ones, because it's so incredibly important to the way we orient our lives, is good versus evil. And so we have a tendency when we see any kind of conflict to frame it as a white hat versus black hat scenario, which is weird because in damn near every altercation that you ever get into personally or know anything about, it's always much more shades of gray. Some people are some right in some aspects, some people are wrong in another aspect. Sometimes it's just a fight in a bar where it's two just jagoffs. There's no white hat to be found, and it matters because it affects our politics really deeply. And I mean, look at the Ukraine versus Russia situation. There are no white hats there, but because Russia is the aggressor and our regime has been monkeying around in that area of the world for all sorts of nefarious reasons for a couple of decades, if not more, then we are primed, or we have a narrative shoved down our throat that Ukraine is this burgeoning Thomas Jefferson laden democracy, and they're being oppressed by the madman dictator Putin. And you're right on the black hat side. Putin is a monster, no question. But the right narrative, if we were thinking about this correctly, is we've got two gas station owning mafiosos in a fist fight over resources, and one of them is backed by our corrupt side. But we can't think that way, and a big part of it, again, is this good versus evil narrative structure that I think of as white hats and black hats. So I wrote a little article about it. What did you think when you saw it?
I like that you approached it on a couple of different fronts. So first, you sort of began with a psychoanalytical view of, I don't know if you want to call it the structure of the brain or something like that. You had a link in the newsletter to what was it called? The theory of narrative thinking, TNT, something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just know that. I just Googled what I was after, and it pops up over and over. Neuroscientists will tell you that's definitely the way we structure, the way we think, the way we cognate. It's narrative. There's no two ways about it.
It was really interesting to me because, as you know, I'm a wannabe novelist, right? So I write stories and primarily short stories. I'm kind of working on my first big novel right now, and when you're and I write genre fiction, so things like fantasy, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. Not what you would call literature or some of that literary, the all the college graduated English majors, right? With the flowery words.
You're not giving us Little Women or Jane Eyre?
Yeah, well, that stuff's still done in the romantic style, so that stuff is cool, and we can. This might be an interesting topic for another time, but the stuff that's coming out of sort of these literary schools is kind of just I don't like it. But in genre fiction, you're driven, you're constantly told in the way genre is taught, plot structure. You're taught about heroes that have an inciting incident that have to overcome obstacles, trial and error, and at the end they either accomplish the goal or don't accomplish the goal. And that's how I approach my storytelling. And what this article explained was that there's a reason why those kinds of stories resonate. There's a reason why Michael Crichton and uh, whoever else, J.K. Rowling, pick your favorite genre author, sell a million copies of their books, and some of these literary novels that don't sell anything, or they outsell things like historical
Sure.
document historical books, or academic books or things like that. It's because it turns out we're hardwired in our brain to think in story. And I hadn't ever thought about it like that, because I had always wondered, why when writing genre fiction am I always being told you have to have this certain plot structure, and all sort of Hollywood movies follow a certain plot structure. Sometimes as a writer you think this seems like a little formulaic, and why can't I break out of the box? Why can't I tell stories in a different way? Why does there have to be a beginning, middle, and end? Why does there have to be a goal that the hero contemplates? Why can't I just tell a story of a man eating breakfast, and that's the whole story? Why isn't that as interesting as Tom Cruise has to defuse the bomb and stop the terrorist and save the world? What's the difference? Well, and your newsletter, and the links in that story, that newsletter piece you wrote, really kind of explained it. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit, and clicked on some of these articles, came onto one on medium.com, The Science Behind Storytelling, subtitle, Our Brains Are Hardwired for Narrative, Now We're Starting to Understand Why. And it basically explains the evolutionary purpose of this. Do you want to go into that a little bit more?
Well, all I could do is offer my conjecture, but it sounds like you've got something a little bit more structured in front of you.
Well, basically what they're saying was, um, again, go back to the caveman times, right?
Right.
So not only does putting things in a story structure help us predict the future. So it's basically what happened in the past, how what am I living in the present, and your brain sort of tells a story. So
That's
the
how I was gonna
beginning,
go.
the middle, and then you can almost predict the future of the story, the ending, and that helps you survive. But also putting things in story, putting things with yourself first, with you as the protagonist, because there's no writing materials, there's no pen and paper. Telling a story helps pass that along from generation to generation.
There's
And
definitely the oral history aspect, but I wanna go back to that first thing you said. We touched on it a little bit in that gambling episode,
mhm,
because I think you're right. Without that narrative structure, we'd never get up off the ground to accomplish a goal. The way we think is because of the way we act. We identify ourselves as the actor. We identify a purpose, and then we perform verb X to go accomplish that purpose. And every single thing we do is framed in that manner. And if it wasn't, we'd be some other kind of species. We an amoeba. Or God, maybe maybe I'm wrong. Maybe even all life on this planet has to sort of act that way. But us with our big brains, that's how we cognate. And it would be weird as hell if we thunk in a different way.
right. And what was really interesting was how important in the story narrative it was that the protagonist, the hero of the story, actually needed help.
Hmm.
So the idea was that a person could not survive without their tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're building the story, the hero starts, has an inciting incident. They have to accomplish a goal and overcome an obstacle. But in order to overcome the obstacle, they need help from their friends or allies or
Yep.
something. And so by putting it in this way, it helps enforce the importance of community and the tribe and everyone being a part of it. And it's not just the hero's journey, it's the whole community's journey.
I
And
got
and
a
there's Yeah, go ahead.
I got a little theory I'll run past you that just occurred to me. Every story has to be, this narrative structure, obviously, or it's not going to go anywhere. And I'm guessing that the best stories are the ones that layer that, that narrative with the virtues of the time and place for the people involved, and the most deep-seated ones the best, like needing community, needing your friends, employing virtues in the accomplishment of a goal. I imagine the stories that really resonate are the ones that work on many levels, orienting the listener correctly in a way that'll help them achieve their goals moving forward, inspired by that story.
Um, yeah, I think that's exactly right. One other side note that I think is relevant to today's sort of culture war type of stuff is that in the academic circles, you'll see them poo poo. They'll put down genre fiction all the time, like science fiction. Oh, that's not real literature. Romance novels, those aren't real literature. And then nowadays, what you'll hear is, well, that's just a Western concept of how to tell a story. This
Mm,
idea of plot and a hero and a has to overcome a goal. That's just our Western bias on how to tell a story. And that doesn't mean other cultures stories are not as good or aren't necessarily the right way to write. But actually, this article that I found, or a couple of the articles I read, actually kind of dispels that myth. And in fact, it turns out that all stories in all cultures throughout history follow the same structure.
yeah,
And
for a
some of
reason.
those, yeah, some of the examples in this article I read gave the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu killing the bull of heaven. Um, the tale of Genji, on and on. The stories of Buddha, whatever the famous stories may be, they all follow, and of course, all the Greek plays, um, all follow this structure. And whether it's a tragedy or it's a happy ending, um, the structure is still the same. So I actually thought that was really interesting, and it goes to the point that human nature. I don't know how I wanna say this exactly. Do you have an idea where I'm trying to go with that? But it's just sort of evidence that there is sort of, general human nature kind of.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident. And before I try and elucidate what you were getting at, let me let me draw it out by shining a light from a different angle. Freaking Ayn Rand, man, she was such a genius. It just occurred to me as you were talking that I think it was in the Fountainhead. Ellsworth Toohey is this great evil creature in that novel, and he was always trying to subvert good, to subvert society in these just devious, awful ways, to the point of poisoning the love relationship of his niece with Peter Keating in just the most nasty ways. And one of the things that he did was promote, I think it was in the newspaper, these periodical story episodes that were just this bland. It was literally Jack Eats Breakfast or some nonsense like that. And he would, lavish high literary praise on these just tidbits of awfulness, trying to get the public to swallow. Well, if I want to be a smart person, I guess I better think this garbage is a real good story. And it was just, she was so smart, giving you such a concrete and visceral thing about this is how civilizations crumble, by abandoning the true virtues of their nature, even as something as simple as a damn story. And I think you're right. I think the correct stories aren't. It's not just that this manner of telling a story is true for our place in time. I suspect it will always be true for our species in all spaces in all times. The only thing that's going to change is the tech, and maybe some cultural stuff, kind of music or something. But no, I think there's a deep essence here. I don't think it's random in the slightest.
I was gonna kinda make reference to Rand too. She was so ahead of her time, or how she thought of this, because now, actually, today, you are seeing novels being published that are
I know.
literally
I know.
gobbledygook on purpose, unreadable. because it's supposed to be out of the box. It's supposed to be tearing down the structure, the traditional structures and frameworks, and dismantling all of that, right?
Well, look, man, we swallowed that Jackson Pollock stuff, right? Why not this?
Yep.
That
And
guy's a
it's no,
genius.
I mean, it's no surprise some of that stuff was, if you go down the conspiracy hole, funded by certain entities to cause disruption and chaos and instability in society. I mean, architecture is pretty ugly these days, or at least it was for a while. I think it's actually getting better, but um, yeah, it's crazy. And of course, not that this has anything to do with storytelling exactly, but the greatest, one of the greatest lines in all of literary is Ellsworth Toohey asked Mr. Rourke, "Mr. Rourke, what do you think of me?"
But I don't think of you.
"I don't think of you."
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's such an understated exclamation point. It's beautiful.
And she wrote, and one of the things that always stuck with me, because I feel this way a lot sometimes too. I feel like it's very hard for someone of my approach to writing to get published these days. Which, thank goodness, there's self-publishing, because forget the traditional publishing houses. But back then, the internet didn't exist, and I remember she wrote a short story. I can't remember what it was called right now, but it was about a writer who was the greatest writer ever, but he could never get published. And he tried and he tried, and the world just kept rejecting him. And eventually he just gave up and started looking in the classified ads for a regular job. And I always felt sad about that. But I always also felt hope that, her novels still sell a lot of copies today. And even though neither of us are objectivists, we still have a lot in common with what she thought, and still think
Sure.
she was a hero for what she did get right. And that's kind of what I take my inspiration on. I think in order to spread a message, I think it's probably better done through art
I
than
agree.
through academic work. So I think a novel like maybe Probability Broach by L. Neil Smith was a big one for me, or Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Heinlein, right? Or the Rand stuff, or any of those sort of quote unquote libertarian fiction novels, if you will, do more to change society than, no offense to Murray Rothbard, but how many people have read Man, Economy, and State? I mean,
No,
I
no, you're
have, but
absolutely right.
you
You're
know,
absolutely right. And as we start to wrap up here, I just want to get out there that it's not like I'm saying the white hat, black hat perspective is a mistake, but it would obviously be a mistake to abandon that perspective. Good versus evil and differentiating between the two is crucial. I just think it's important that we recognize that in most real situations, it's not that cut and dried. There are good and evil aspects of actions and characters. And as you get sharper and sharper in discerning between the two, you'll notice, shades of gray in people, in yourself, in the characters. I thought it was a good innovation. I don't know when it was, but when you started to see anti-heroes, kind of,
mhm.
you show, I guess it was even an older technique to show a hero with a flaw or something. But it's good. It shouldn't all be this comic book nonsense. You should be able to show growth and conflict between values, or not understanding a singular united set of values, that sort of thing. And please, if we don't start figuring out how to differentiate or look outside of the black hat, white hat framework when we're looking at foreign policy or political struggles in general, like if you find yourself leaning conservative and so therefore you're Republican, if you view that struggle as my side white hats, them side black hats, well, you are wrong. You were just wrong. You're fooling yourself, and you're being childish, honestly. So I encourage everybody to understand that tendency and break out of it. And if you can do so, you will literally see the world more accurately, and your thoughts will become clearer.
So that's the punchline to your newsletter piece, and that's the real important part. We spent a lot of time talking about human nature and how story structures are sort of ingrained in the structure of our brains, or the way we think. But the punchline, the key point, the key takeaway is this affects the way we see the world, and we need to be aware of that. I'd like to read a quote just real quick from your newsletter that I think really sums it up quite well. You said, when we see people or groups of people fighting, we immediately try to slot the conflict into one of our most powerful narrative structures, the fight between right and wrong, good and evil, white hats and black hats. This is perfectly natural. It's essential that we view the world that way. Right behavior leads to prosperity and peace. Wrong behavior leads to misery and war. If we didn't have a tendency to view the world through that lens, we would never have gotten this far. So I think that's a great way to sum it up. And I think we need to realize that we have this tendency to see the world in black and white, that when we see two people fighting, we assume one must be good and one must be bad. And as you said, when it comes to things like foreign policy and war, you should be thinking they're both bad. There's no good sides there.
Yeah, amen, brother. Thank you for that. And I'd like to encourage the good people out there to go to heymannature.substack.com, and you'll see more articles like this. And if you join as a paid subscriber, you will get access to extra fun stuff that we put behind the paywall there. I'd also like you to check out my other podcast with Brian O'Leary called Natural Order. naturalorderpodcast.com gets you there, as well as all the podcatchers where you can also get Heyman Nature. It's not just a YouTube and a Rumble show. And check out Heyman Nature at Heyman Nature on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it this decade. And also my personal account is Rerazer at Rerazer, Rerazer. And thanks very much for watching or listening to Heyman Nature.